Hi everyone, I'm Tolin Sang. This is my oral presentation for Luke X, and I will be your host for the next 10 to 15 minutes, and please bear with me. So for my first paper for narrative criticism, I chose Acts chapter 7, verse 8 to 36, which is Stephen's speech. And to begin Stephen's speech, Luke already said that Stephen was innocent and he was wrongfully accused, and his opponent even brought false witnesses. Here, Stephen, the irony in this speech is that Stephen was not trying to defend himself, but he was even counter accusing his opponent for failing to realize that everything, the entire scripture and Mosaic law, the temple worship, they are all fulfilled in Jesus Christ. So the key word, is, one of the key words is in verse 35. That is a demonstrative pronoun to it is a demonstrative pronoun to draw attention to Moses, as though Stephen wants to say, hey, it was this Moses. He was chosen by God, but you rejected him. If Stephen had a chance to finish his speech, because he was stoned before he finished his speech, so he might have his intention might be that hey, it was this Moses, now it is this Jesus that you are rejecting. So this is what Stephen is trying put, narrating his speech. He first brought Joseph. He was rejected, but he became a ruler. And again, Moses, he was rejected, but he became a ruler and a redeemer of his people. Another words like forefather, patriarchs, and ancestors are repeated as Stephen told the history of the Israelites, and they are parallel with the land of Egypt, or and even the land outside of Jerusalem, because here Stevens is saying that holy place is not where God dwells. Where God dwells is truly the holy place. By pointing out that Mount Sinai is not where the temple is, or it's not where you know where God dwells, but he specified that it is the holy place. So the main character in this story, I mean in Stephen's story speech, is Joseph and Moses, and the main character in Luke narrative is Stephen. And another ironic thing is that there is no verbal response from the opponents throughout the entire Stephen speech. Only when they couldn't withstand, the conclusion that the ideological point of view of the narrative, that is, the authority of Jesus, will have the final call. No matter how hard you try, or no matter how you rejected him, Jesus will have the final call, because the entire law, everything, the temple worship, they are all fulfilled in Jesus Christ. And my second paper is on Luke 24, verse 36 to 53, and I will look at how Luke treated the Old Testament in his passage. And this is about the story. this is about the scene is set after the resurrection of Jesus, where he met his disciple on the road to Emmaus. And in this passage, there is no direct quotation from the Old Testament. However, it does allude to the Old Testament as the liturgical rhythm of teaching and eating, evident through Luke, has deep roots in the Old Testament. Quote, in general, Luke's hermeneutical method is not to cite proof passage from the Old Testament. Rather, Luke's method is to portray Jesus as the final consummation of the pattern set by Moses, the prophets, and the psalmist. And one of the key words that I find really attracting in this passage as I was studying, I was focusing on some other words, but this word finally caught my attention, and I was fascinated with this word because I only know, I assume, I think that this is only attached to the Gospel of John. But here, after the resurrection, Jesus, when he introduced his disciple in verse 39, he says, "It is I, myself." Here, there is a demonstrative pronoun to anticipy who he is himself. Because the I am frequent in John, or the I am from the Old Testament. This is what Jesus is trying to say. Hey, Jesus is not trying to say, hey, I was the one who was crucified. I was the one who walked with you for the past 3 years. No, this is not what Jesus was trying to say. And Luke shaped his narrative in a way that will point to Jesus' fulfillment of the scripture that he is the I am of the Old Testament. And quote, the passion and resurrection of Christ are the final consummation of all scripture, the sign of fulfillment. Jesus follows the Old Testament pattern in his life and death and resurrection and completes it. Conversely, from the New Testament perspective, one could even say that Moses, the prophets, and the psalmists had to be conformed to the pattern that would be set by Christ himself. So, here, when Jesus Christ introduced himself to his terrifying disciple, it is I, myself. And the Hebrew imperfect ayah, in Hebrew sense, it is a future tense, like it is the same as it is in the Old Testament. Their grammatical form is not the present form, but it is more in the future, so it can be translated as I shall be whoever I shall choose to be. So Jesus is everything. You can name him the way you want. You can call him Yahweh or Adonai or whatever you want. He says, I shall be whoever I shall choose to be. So the I style of the Old Testament can be seen in Jewish apocalyptic. Here it says, I will lead into bright light those who love my holy name. Here God is saying. And the I style is a self-proclamation and common in the theophanies. Here God says, I am the God of thy father Abraham. I am with thee. And this is in a Jewish literature in Jubilee 24:22. And another significant thing is that the I style usage by human is considered as self-predication as God or Lord, and it is offensive and arrogant in Jewish eyes, since they violate the honor of the one God. So here Jesus is saying, it is the I am. So Luke's purpose of writing this passage is that to portray Jesus as the final consummation of the pattern set by Moses, the prophets, and the psalmist. The overall thrust of God's redemptive activity in the Old Testament, in conformity with the righteous plan of salvation, demands that God, innocent, righteous Messiah, must suffer an agonizing death and be raised on the third day. The passion and resurrection of Christ are the final consummation of all Scripture, the sign of fulfillment. Code. So, although there are no quotation directly from the Old Testament, here Luke echo a lot of Old Testament passage in his narrative, and the main thing, the irony in this passage is that Luke is telling is that he's not trying to draw those passage if out of the Old Testament in his narrative, but instead he say that everything that are in the Old Testament have been fulfilled in Jesus Christ. That's why Jesus says, "It is I myself." Thank you.